The wind that night was like a living thing. It screamed through the cracks of the wooden houses, rattled the shutters, and clawed at the roofs as if it wanted to tear the village apart. Inside, people lay awake, staring at the ceilings above their beds, listening to the hunger in their stomachs grow louder than the storm outside. Bread was gone. Root cellars stood nearly empty. The children coughed in their sleep, their breath white in the frozen air. And in the middle of that bitter winter, only one thing stood between life and starvation: the oats locked away in the storage barn. Before I take you into this forgotten night, if you believe stories like this should never be lost, hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and share this story. It helps more people hear about the moments when even the smallest heroes changed everything. The winter had arrived earlier than anyone expected. By late November, snow already lay thick as a blanket, burying the fields and swallowing the paths between the houses. The harvest had been poor that year, too much rain in the spring and too little sun in the summer. By the time the farmers had cut what was left, the sacks of oats were meager, far less than usual. But they had stored them carefully, together in the large barn at the edge of the village, as though the walls themselves could promise safety. Inside the houses, families tried to stretch their meals. Mothers boiled thin soups, making broth from bones long stripped of meat. Fathers broke hard crusts into smaller pieces so children could pretend it was enough. Everyone counted the days, then the hours, until the barn would be opened again, and more oats would be shared. If the oats lasted until the thaw, the village would survive. If not, well, no one dared finish the thought. The barn itself was nothing grand. A square building of rough timber, its roof patched with straw, the kind of structure you'd pass without noticing in summer. But now it stood like a fortress. A heavy lock hung on the door, and the village elder carried the key tied to a cord around his neck. Every night he checked it twice before going to bed, making sure the lock still held, making sure no desperate hands had forced their way inside. That was the fear nobody spoke about aloud. Not the snow, not the sickness, not the howling hunger. The real fear was people. Hunger makes good men do desperate things. Neighbors can turn into thieves when their children cry through the night. Strangers passing through the woods might smell the oats or hear whispers about them. Everyone knew it could happen, but no one wanted to say it. So they told themselves the barn was safe. Yet one creature in the village didn't need words to sense danger. He had no name, not really. The children sometimes called him Russet for his brown coat, but to most he was simply the dog. He wasn't anyone's pet in particular, though he slept most often near the blacksmith's house, curling himself into the ashes for warmth. He ate scraps when he could get them, bones thrown from the cooking pots, or a heel of bread given by a kind hand. Thin, with ribs showing under his fur, he looked almost as hungry as the people. But his eyes were sharp, and his ears never seemed to rest. That night, while the villagers tossed in uneasy sleep, the dog lay stretched out on the frozen earth near the barn. His breath steamed in the air. Every so often, he lifted his head, listening. The storm's roar covered most sounds, but he caught others: the faint crack of a branch, the scrape of a boot against ice, the long pause of silence that didn't belong to nature. His tail twitched. His ears pinned back. Something was moving where nothing should be. In the houses, no one stirred. The elder slept with the key still tight around his neck. Mothers dreamed restless dreams of food. Fathers clutched their children closer to keep them warm. None of them saw the shadows slipping between the trees, edging closer to the barn. None of them heard the quiet voices, the whispered plans. None of them knew how close hunger was to stealing what little hope remained. But the dog knew. He pressed his paws into the snow, muscles stiff with cold, and let out a low growl that was almost swallowed by the wind. His body quivered with the choice: stay silent and safe, or rise and face what came. And in that moment, he stood. By dawn, the storm had softened to a steady whisper, but the village still felt heavy, as if the air itself carried hunger. The few fires that burned in hearths were fed with scraps of wood, furniture broken down, anything that could give warmth for one more night. Smoke curled low across the rooftops, and inside, people woke with the same thought as always: how much food is left? The elder moved through the streets slowly, a bent man in a wool cloak that had lost its shape long ago. Around his neck the iron key knocked against his chest with every step. He looked into the faces of neighbors, seeing the same tired eyes, the same hollow cheeks. Children's voices were quieter now, their games fewer, their laughter almost gone. Hunger takes away sound, leaving silence like a blanket. But he kept reminding them, "We have the oats. As long as the oats are safe, spring will come, and we will live." His words weren't just comfort. They were truth. Without that barn, the village had no chance. Life continued with careful routines. Women patched clothes again and again, stitching until fabric thinned to air. Men tried to keep tools sharp though there was little to use them for. And every evening, when the sun slipped behind the white horizon, someone always asked, "Will the oats last?" The dog remained a shadow on the edge of these lives. He didn't belong to anyone, not truly, yet everyone knew him. He wandered from house to house, slipping between legs, waiting near doors. Sometimes a child would sneak him a piece of bread, sometimes a man would mutter and push him away. But the dog never left the barn for long. He circled it, sniffed at the lock, settled by its wall when the sky turned dark. On the second night after the storm, something shifted. The villagers didn't notice, it was too small, too easy to miss. But the dog did. A scent lingered near the barn door, strange and sharp, like sweat carried on frozen air. He paced in restless circles, his nails scratching the packed snow, his eyes fixed on the tree line. Inside their houses, the people were blind to it all. They gathered close, whispering, trying to ignore the gnawing inside their bellies. A mother pressed a finger to her lips when her daughter asked for food again. A father cut the last slice of bread into four, pretending it was enough. Sleep came slow, and it brought no rest. Sometime deep in the night, the dog's ears twitched. He heard it, the crunch of snow, deliberate, cautious. Shapes moved in the darkness, men cloaked against the cold, their breath pluming in the air. They didn't come with open hands. They carried sacks, ropes, tools that glinted faintly under the moon. The dog rose. His fur bristled along his spine. He barked once, sharp and loud, a sound that broke the night apart. Then again, louder, until the whole village stirred. Windows opened, heads appeared, confusion in their eyes. The barking grew frantic, echoing through the streets. By the time the first lanterns lit and men stumbled into the snow, the shadows had already vanished back into the trees. No one saw their faces. No one knew how many. Only the dog's tracks and a few deep prints in the snow showed that something had been there. The elder examined the door. The lock still held, but the wood bore fresh scratches, marks where a tool had tried to pry it open. His hand trembled as he touched it. So it begins, he thought. The villagers stood in a circle, clutching their cloaks tighter, eyes darting to one another. No one wanted to speak, but the truth hung in the freezing air. Someone had tried to steal the oats. Hunger had already arrived at their doorstep, wearing human form. The dog stood at the center of it all, chest heaving, his paws stained from digging in the snow. He didn't wag his tail. He didn't beg for food. He only watched the dark tree line, as if he knew this was not over. That night, the barn became more than just a storage place. It became a battlefield waiting for the first clash. The third night was colder still. The air cracked in people's lungs when they breathed, and frost crept along the edges of windows like white claws. Inside the houses, no one spoke much anymore. Words took energy, and energy was too precious to waste. A few men sat together in the elder's house, voices low, debating whether the attempted theft had come from outside the village or from one of their own. Neither answer brought comfort. "We lock our doors, we trust each other, but," one said, and let the thought hang. Everyone knew what he meant. Hunger didn't care about friendship. It could bend even the strongest loyalties. The elder shook his head. "We don't accuse our neighbors without proof. Whoever it was, they were driven by desperation. That's all." His words tried to keep peace, but his fingers tightened around the iron key at his chest as if it might leap away from him. The dog stayed close to the barn that day, pacing restlessly. Children tried to coax him with play, tossing sticks into the snow, but he ignored them. His gaze never left the line of trees. Something in his instincts told him danger hadn't passed, it was only waiting. When night fell, the village huddled into uneasy silence. Candles burned low. Mothers rocked their children to sleep with quiet songs, though their voices cracked from thirst and weakness. Fathers set heavy chairs against doors, as if wood and iron could protect against hunger in human form. And out by the barn, the dog lay curled tight, nose pressed into his paws, ears flicking at every sound. The snow muffled footsteps, but he could hear the rhythm of approach. A pause. Then another step. Then silence. Shadows were moving again. This time they came closer. 3, maybe 4 men, their shapes jagged against the faint light of the moon. They crept to the barn with greater courage than before. One carried an iron bar, another a rope. Their breaths were heavy, impatient. Hunger had made them bold. The dog leapt to his feet. His bark cut the night in half, fierce and relentless. The men froze. Then one cursed, and another hissed, "Quiet him!" A stone flew through the air and struck the ground near the dog. He didn't retreat. He lunged forward, teeth bared, barking louder, fiercer, each sound sharp enough to pierce walls. Lanterns flared to life in the houses. Shouts rang out. The would-be thieves panicked. They yanked at the barn door once, twice, the iron bar biting into the wood but not breaking it. The lock held. And then the noise of people rushing into the snow broke their courage. They ran, vanishing into the trees, leaving only their tracks behind. Villagers gathered quickly, lanterns swinging, eyes wide with fear and anger. Some carried axes, some only sticks. They saw the marks on the door, deeper than the night before, proof that the thieves had meant to take everything. A few muttered curses. One man spat into the snow. The elder raised a trembling hand. Enough. They are gone. The oats are safe, for now. But everyone could see the truth written on his face. This was only the beginning. And in the center of the circle, the dog stood, chest heaving, fur bristled, eyes blazing. He had held the line once again, but even he seemed to know it couldn't last forever. The thieves would return, hungrier, angrier, more determined. That night, long after the villagers had returned to their houses, the dog didn't lie down. He stood guard in the snow until the first pale light of morning spread across the roofs. He wasn't just a stray anymore. He had become the village's first defender. By the 4th night, the village had changed. No one went to bed without first glancing toward the barn. Fathers checked the locks on their doors twice, sometimes 3 times, before allowing themselves to lie down. Mothers whispered prayers over their children. And every time the dog barked, even at the passing of a crow's shadow or the creak of ice on the roof, hearts leapt into throats. Fear had settled in like a second winter. The men gathered again in the elder's house. The lantern flickered on the wooden walls, casting faces in tired light. "They'll come again," one man said. "It's only a matter of time." "They're desperate," another muttered. "But desperate men can kill." The elder held the iron key in his palm, staring at it as if it carried the weight of the whole village. "We guard the oats because they guard us. If we lose them, we lose everything." His eyes lifted slowly. "Tomorrow we'll take turns keeping watch. No more leaving the barn to chance." But even as he spoke, he knew their strength was fading. Hunger gnawed at them all. They weren't soldiers, they were farmers, woodcutters, blacksmiths. The dog had more strength in his thin frame than many of them had left. That evening, the children gathered near the fire, whispering to each other about the dog. "He's not just guarding the barn," one girl said, clutching a doll with missing buttons. "He knows things. He can smell danger before it comes." The other children nodded, eyes wide. In their minds, the dog was no longer just a stray. He was a guardian sent by something greater. When night fell, the village lay in uneasy silence again. Snowflakes drifted down, covering the old footprints, erasing evidence of the nights before. But the dog did not forget. He lay under the eaves of the barn, ears pricked, eyes open, waiting. Hours passed. Then, movement. This time it was no quiet creeping. The thieves returned with purpose. Lantern light flickered between the trees, casting long shadows. Their steps were heavy, confident. The hunger that drove them had burned away fear. They carried more than tools now. One man had a knife glinting in his hand, another gripped a heavy stick. The dog's growl rumbled low and steady before it broke into sharp, furious barks. His voice split the silence of the night, echoing through the frozen streets. Inside the houses, villagers bolted upright. The elder struggled to his feet, clutching the key at his chest. Men grabbed what weapons they could find, axes, pitchforks, anything, and stumbled into the snow. But the thieves were already at the barn. The iron bar slammed against the door, wood cracking under the force. The lock shuddered. The dog hurled himself at them, teeth snapping, his small body crashing into legs and boots. One man shouted in anger, kicking at him, but the dog came back, snarling, eyes wild with fire. The barn door groaned under the assault. Splinters flew. The dog's barking grew louder, sharper, until it sounded less like an animal and more like a war cry. His courage filled the empty streets, shaking the villagers awake. Lanterns appeared, voices rose, footsteps crunched on snow. The thieves hesitated, eyes darting toward the lights approaching fast. They cursed, pulled back, and disappeared once more into the trees. But this time they left more than footprints behind, they left fear carved into the villagers' hearts. The people gathered around the barn, staring at the cracked wood, the lock barely holding. The elder ran his hand over the splintered frame, his face pale. "One more night like this," he whispered, "and nothing will stop them." The dog stood there in the snow, formatted, sides heaving, eyes fixed on the darkness where the men had gone. He didn't relax, not even when the villagers touched his back in thanks. He knew, as surely as they all did, that the fight wasn't finished. And somewhere in the black silence of the forest, the thieves were already planning their return. The fifth night carried a silence heavier than any storm. Snow lay thick on the ground, untouched except for the prints of the dog as he paced around the barn again and again. The moon shone cold and bright, spilling silver light over the village, and every shadow looked like a threat. People didn't sleep much anymore. They sat awake with candles burning low, listening, waiting. The elder sat by his window, the iron key in his hand. He had been strong for the others, but now, alone, his shoulders sagged. He whispered to himself, "One more night. Just one more." But even he didn't believe it. The dog didn't whisper. He didn't hope. He only watched. His body was thin, his breath steaming in the frozen air, but his eyes never left the tree line. He had fought them back twice. He would fight again. And then, just after midnight, the silence broke. The sound came first, boots crushing snow, many of them, heavier than before. Then the light of lanterns bobbing between the trees, more than the last time. The thieves had not come to test the barn. They had come to take it. The dog launched forward, barking so furiously it shook the stillness like thunder. His body slammed against the barn door, as if to shield it with his own weight. Men burst from the forest, 5, maybe 6 this time, faces hidden, hands full of weapons. They rushed the barn like wolves. The dog met them head-on. He snapped at legs, at hands, forcing them back, making them stumble. A stick swung down hard and struck his side, knocking him into the snow. He yelped, but before the echo faded he was on his feet again, teeth bared, throwing himself at them once more. Inside the houses, the barking woke the village like an alarm bell. Mothers shook their children awake. Fathers grabbed whatever they could, a hatchet, a hoe, a wooden club, and ran into the freezing night. Lanterns flickered to life one by one, voices shouted, doors slammed. But the thieves had already forced the barn door. Wood cracked, hinges screamed. One man pushed through with a sack in hand. Another pulled at the lock with iron, snapping it loose. The treasure of the village, the sacks of oats, was within reach. The dog hurled himself at the man entering the barn. His teeth sank into cloth, his weight dragging the figure down into the snow. The man screamed and kicked wildly. The dog held on, even as blows rained down on his back, even as pain shuddered through his thin body. He would not let go. Then the villagers arrived. Shouts filled the night, a rush of footsteps pounding through the snow. Torches lit the scene, thieves and defenders clashing under the pale light of the moon. The dog's barking rose above it all, wild and unrelenting, calling them to fight. One thief dropped his sack and fled. Another stumbled under a blow from a villager's axe handle. The others, seeing their chance of victory vanish, broke into the trees, disappearing into the darkness with curses on their lips. Silence followed, broken only by the heavy breathing of men and the whimpering cry of the dog. He lay in the snow, his fur dark with blood, his chest rising and falling in ragged gasps. The elder knelt beside him, hands shaking. "The oats are safe," someone whispered. But no one looked at the barn. All eyes were on the dog who had made it so. Villagers surrounded him, their faces pale in the torchlight. They had been ready to fight, but it was the dog who had fought hardest, who had stood first, who had refused to yield. The elder's voice cracked as he spoke. "This animal has done more for us than we have done for ourselves." His hand brushed the dog's head gently. "Tonight, he saved us all." The dog's eyes fluttered, still fixed on the tree line as if watching for danger. He didn't look at the people. He didn't need thanks. He only needed to know the barn was safe. And then his eyes closed. His body sagged into the snow. The villagers stood frozen, their breath white in the night air, not knowing if they had just witnessed the end of their guardian. Morning came slow, its pale light stretching across the rooftops like a reluctant promise. The storm had passed, but the village carried the weight of the night before. Smoke drifted thin from chimneys, and silence clung to the air as people gathered near the barn. The dog lay where he had fallen, his body curled in the snow, his fur stiff with dried blood. For a long time no one moved. Then the elder knelt, pressing a trembling hand against the animal's chest. His breath caught, then released in a whisper. "He lives." The villagers exhaled together, relief washing through them like warmth. The children cried openly, some reaching to touch the dog's paw, others burying their faces in their mothers' coats. Men bowed their heads, shame burning in their throats. They had spoken of guarding the oats, but it was the dog who had stood alone against hunger. They carried him carefully into the elder's house, laying him on blankets near the fire. He was weak, his breath shallow, but his eyes opened once, flickering toward the barn as though to ask if it still stood. When he saw the nods, he let his head rest again. That day, the village worked with renewed strength. They repaired the broken barn door, hammered new boards, and forged a stronger lock. Men kept watch in shifts, but everyone knew the thieves would not return soon. The fight had been too loud, too fierce. The oats were safe. The days dragged on, but the dog began to heal. He ate scraps placed gently before him, drank water from wooden bowls, and lifted his head when children whispered his name. Russet, guardian, brave one, they called him many things, each name filled with gratitude. Winter stretched long, but the oats lasted. Each family received their share, measured with care, stretched with broth and herbs until the thaw finally came. Grass pushed through the snow, rivers broke their ice, and the fields opened for planting. The village had survived. When spring arrived, the dog walked again, though slower than before. He no longer roamed the village as a stray. Now he was fed, sheltered, treated as one of their own. Wherever he went, children ran beside him. Men lifted their hats in respect. Women placed food at their doors. But the strongest memory was of that night. People told and retold it around fires, in fields, to travelers passing through. They spoke of how a thin, hungry dog had saved them when they had almost lost everything. They spoke of courage not born from strength, but from loyalty and instinct. Years later, long after the dog had gone, the barn still stood. The village grew, fields spread wider, children became adults. Yet the story lived on. Some said the dog's spirit still circled the barn on winter nights, his bark echoing in the wind, a reminder that hunger could be beaten if courage held firm. And so the tale remained, passed from voice to voice. The night when a dog stopped hunger, the forgotten story of the saved oats. Because sometimes the greatest guardian of a village isn't a man with a weapon, but a creature who asks for nothing, and gives everything.